From the director's explanation that Barry sees everything as a water world, to all the problems the movie faced during its production. Here's the disappointing reason why The Flash has the worst CGI. Apparently, it's supposed to look bad. The first time we heard of the lame excuse was in 2021 when the VFX supervisor John Desjardins told us to get ready to see some weird stuff. He talked about how he was working on conceptual research and development, and the ideas he'd come up with were strange and intriguing. Director Andy Muschietti's sister Barbara said similar things. She was grateful for the pandemic as it allowed the team to explore visual effects like never before. Now that the movie is out, I think it's safe to say that the CG is strange, but not in an intriguing way. While the movie has been positively received, the VFX has been bugging almost everyone, from fans to critics. It was especially shocking, since the movie had an eye-watering budget of $220 million, making it one of the most expensive DC films ever. Andy finally addressed the criticism later. His explanation is that we, the audience, are seeing things through the perspective of the Flash, which is why lights and textures are distorted. This water-world look is how Barry sees the world, so the weirdness was definitely intended. It's not the best excuse, if you ask me. Here's why. Starting with the obvious, none of the Flash's comics have ever said anything about the world looking different for him than other humans. It's also never been brought up in the DC Extended Universe. As a filmmaker, Andy knows that you have to give context for these details in the actual movie, not in interviews after the fact. That just makes people think Muschietti is making things up. But let's say that this was a quirk of the Flash's powers. Barry actually spends a big chunk of the movie without his super speed, so why do things still look strange to him? There's so much wrong with the CGI in this movie that no in-universe explanation could justify it. Where do I even start? How about at the beginning of the movie, where Batman's big chase scene has him bouncing around like a basketball? Barry wasn't even in that scene, so Andy's explanation wouldn't apply there. Or how about at the end, where Ezra Miller's face looks like it's sliding off their head? The effect of having two Barrys on screen at once doesn't always look solid. It's been done better in other movies, many of which are much older than this one. Even the scenes of Barry running fast look bad. It's a Flash movie. That's the one thing they had to nail. Imagine a Spider-Man movie in which the web swinging looks bad. Ridiculous, right? By far the worst offender in the CGI department was the big climax, which might be the biggest proof that the movie didn't have enough time or money. The Flash enters a state where he can see multiple universes, which are represented by big glowing balls in different colors. The timelines in those universes look like film reels wrapping around the balls. If that wasn't a lame enough way to show the multiverse, the cameos in this scene looked really bad too. It was cool when they used archival footage for the cameos of Adam West and Burt Ward as Batman and Robin. But when the characters turned up in person, they all looked pretty terrible. Someone in the production team must own an action figure of Nicolas Cage as Superman, and they were nice enough to lend it for his scenes in the movie. Even worse were the cameos of Christopher Reeve, Helen Slater, and Teddy Sears, which were powered by AI. Reeve passed away in 2004. So not only did his cameo look weird, but it was kind of a disrespectful thing to do as well. Sears felt the same about his cameo as the Jay Garrick Flash, since they put him in the movie without ever telling him, let alone compensating him. At this point, I should reassure you guys that Michael Keaton was there in person, since you can't trust any of the older actors you see in The Flash. To be fair though, not all of the CGI was terrible. As you'd expect from a superhero movie, there were some really cool moments here and there. Sasha Calle's flying looks pretty good, and you can tell that they used CGI, adding some nice finishing touches to the practical effect of her flight. Supergirl isn't the only hero that looks cool. Even though they messed up the Flash's running, Muschietti is pretty creative with his fight scenes. In general, the action in the movie looks great, and the aging Keaton gets to shine in his big punch-ups. The opening scene of the movie, in which Barry rescues some falling babies, was pretty silly on paper. It looked silly on screen too, but in a way that was kind of fun to introduce us to the vibe of the story. Finally, while the Chrono Bowl looks bad, the speed force that Barry uses to access it looks pretty sweet, with him dramatically breaking the barriers of sound, light, and even time. Speaking of the Chrono Bowl, just to prove to you that I'm not a hater, I'm actually going to bat for the Chrono Bowl. People love to rag on it, but the truth is that The Flash has a pretty complicated system of time travel, when they could have just gone with the classic branching timelines of Back to the Future. In The Flash, when you change something in the past, it's less that you change your own timeline, and more that you take a turn in some sort of multiversal intersection. A change in one timeline can send ripples up and down all timelines. My head is spinning just saying that out loud. But the Chrono Bowl was a cool way to show how the timelines were linked to each other, and how you can wind up in the wrong timeline. It looks ridiculous, sure, but if you can't make something look sensible, you might as well lean into it. The cartoony art style of the Chrono Bowl adds to the surrealness of the place, as if the reason why it looks off-putting to us is because we were never supposed to see it. It's worth remembering that Muschietti also adapted the novel It for the big screen. And those movies also had some uncanny visuals, so he was working in his wheelhouse. Those exceptions aside, the CGI really is terrible, and I wish the team would stop giving dumb reasons to defend it. The truth is actually pretty understandable. One of the challenges of bringing the Flash to any screen, big or small, is always going to be the visuals. After all, this is the character DC Comics uses to explore some of the wildest ideas they can come up with. From the multiverse and time travel shenanigans to Gorilla Grodd, king of Gorilla City and actual Flash villain. You can throw as much money as you want at a Flash project, but the art direction has to be really strong to make these ideas work. After all, for 9 seasons, the CW was trying to do exactly that with their TV show. That series did a lot of really ambitious things. While it didn't work most of the time, the show was able to pull it off because their Barry was likable and charming. The rest of the sidecast was compelling too. The same is true for this movie, which is why the movie is still well rated despite the horrible CGI. After all, these problems will affect every Flash movie or show. To be fair, this movie had its own challenges too. Since the movie began pre-production in 2020, many movies had their productions derailed by the coronavirus pandemic. The Flash was basically forged in lockdowns and work-from-home procedures. One of the industries that was affected by the pandemic was VFX, which doesn't have enough people in Hollywood for the mountains of projects they work on. Thanks to VFX houses shutting down, those artists came back to work with massive backlogs and weren't able to give the movies their best as they crunched through an unending to-do list. There's a reason why it's so easy to tell when a movie was produced during the pandemic. Even the Marvel Cinematic Universe had to deal with terrible VFX, with movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania having effects that were almost worse than The Flash. Andy and the crew would probably have the world's sympathies if they were just honest about the challenges the movie faced. But their excuses were good for a laugh, I suppose. So, from all the problems the movie faced during its production, to the director's explanation that Barry sees everything as a water world, here's the disappointing reason why The Flash has the worst CGI.